Well, I was on from 1972 to 1976, served one term. And I think in a word, our jury and the nucleus of it, by nucleus I mean the several of us that ran with the same ideas about reforming the operation of the jury, was the prospect of going from the unit system, going from the ward system to the unit system. Well, you have to understand first, when we say ward system, what's included in that. That meant that the jurors were fairly authoritative in their respective wards, and like your road taxes were all by road districts which were contiguous with the wards, and so the employees worked for the road district. And you can picture that you have 8 wards, and for example, one of the stories that came out of people that were criticizing the then current operation of the jury was that you'd have situations if you'd have a truck and a crew of guys working on a road somewhere over in Hayes, and some other juror would come along from Ward 1 and say, hey, I want y'all over here afternoon, you know, that type of thing. Then there was a inequality in wages. You had truck drivers because Ward 4 and Ward 3 had most of the money from the assessments, and that led to the fact that people who were truck drivers in Bell City and Starks they did the same thing, made less money. So in essence, it just wasn't, the setup wasn't very efficient for the operation of the parish. You know, that's an oversimplified statement, but that was just that's an example of how it operated. And the jurors, they actually wrote the checks. You know, they met when the time for pay, they wrote the checks. In fact, I don't know how much you want of this on here, but like there was one historical incident that arose out of the fact that the jurors were writing the checks, and do we want to mention names? This guy was convicted.
I'd prefer not to.
We don't need to, yeah. But there was a juror, this was before, but that ended up doing time for payroll fraud. Well, what he was doing, he was taking the checks, he was making out checks to people whose names were and in those days, and here's how he got caught is the interesting thing. An auditor was looking through the payroll checks and noticed that a number of these checks were all cashed at a particular grocery store on June 19th. And in those days, most of the personnel on the road district crews were African American. And Juneteenth, they didn't work on June 19th. That's Emancipation Day. And the auditor was just tipped to that well, why are all these guys getting their checks and working? Well, he'd been making out checks to them and then signing their name. And when you've got 8 different wards, who knows how much slippage there was on expenditures and things like that when you've got 8 different people writing checks and there's no real oversight. Now that's just another situation that was a result, you might say, or fostered by the ward system. There were several of us that ran at that time on the platform of we didn't run as a ticket, but there were several of us, principally the late Julian Dundas and Charles Liggio, Wayne Kingery. Wayne Kingery was a banker. Charles Liggio was an insurance adjuster at the time. I think he was by then already. and see who B.P. Babineau was cooperative with it. He wasn't as in the middle of doing that, but besides Julian and Wayne and myself, I had to look at my letterhead to remember all the names that I brought with me. Yeah, Kenneth East. I couldn't remember. Kenneth was the youngest police juror elected in the state of Louisiana at the time he was elected. I think maybe he was just barely 21 or 20. I hate this is look. We're talking 40 years ago, but if I'm not mistaken, he might even still been at McNeese or getting ready to graduate or something. Anyway, so that group in Ward 3 would you might say the nucleus of those who wanted to reform the system, and there was a considerable vocalization around the community among community leaders and things that were in favor of doing that. And at that time, state law even required that parishes operate on the unit system, but a lot of them didn't do it. And so that was what was the impetus for several of us to run. And then when we were elected, Gene Whitler, the late Gene Whitler, who was already on the jury, but he was open. He was in favor, open to those things. And ultimately, when we voted on going to the unit system, it was 9-5. So that's 14 jurors. 5 people voted against it, principally the rural juror, the outlying jurors. And then we went to work. I was chairman of the Organization and Rules Committee, and that was another thing we did, was to reduce the number of committees and try to set up some structure on regular committee meetings. We set up an agenda system. That was the first time it had that, where we created the agenda meeting the week ahead of time so that jurors knew what was coming up. And that was part of the reform. But I guess the principal thing was to take the jurors out of day-to-day operation. I mean, that in a word, that's what we were aiming to do, is take them out of day-to-day involvement in operation. That's when we effectively created, there's a resolution on record here somewhere, that we had a resolution that created the office of Parish Administrator. It's not even statutory. It's based on the police jury's resolution to structure it that way, and that came out of that was all done in the Organization and Rules Committee. And obviously we had a fine guy to take that position. Late Rodney Vincent had been parish engineer for years, and I remember sitting in the committee meeting, and Rodney was sitting right next to me. And when we were sitting there wording the resolution, we came to the part that all employees, he would have the authority to hiring and firing over all employees, and that you know, we couldn't fire anybody, and that was what we were trying to do. And he told me later, he said he was just stunned when that happened, when we did that, right there in the meeting. He told me later, he said, you know, he said, I thought we were going to kind of, he showed me, we were going to kind of move here, you know, move a little bit here, and he said, you went way over here. So it was a surprise to him. And just another part of change, you know, Rodney at that time, and this is no reflection on him because that's just the way things were done, but he had a 10% interest in W.D.W. Jesson Engineers at the time, and it was known, it wasn't any secret, and we told him he would have to give that up, you know, and he did, so that's how he became parish administrator, and he set he set the example by doing it, because he had the experience, and he was doing a lot of that unofficially, you know. But he set the mark on the function and scope of operation of a parish administrator, and he's one that was Mark McMurray's mentor. And can't say too much good about Rodney, because he was proved invaluable in implementing what was being done. Well, first of all, I guess would be just his historical knowledge, institutional knowledge of what had been going on, you know, or of what the parish had and what assets it had, and I included the employees in that too. You know, he knew it, so he brought that to the table. But he just had a fine mind for administration and organization that suited what he was doing, and he was particularly good at before he would you know, as he would have ideas or things he wanted to propose or suggestions do. He was an excellent politician in being able to talk to different jurors and get them with him, you know, before he would pursue a particular project. You know, but there were a lot of fun things that happened. But you know, sit here and try to think specifically, and sometimes they don't sound funny now. You know, you know. But I just see that several things we started that I think are still in some form being done. One thing that was a big help to us was during that time, the Nixon administration began this concept of block grants of funds to the parishes, and that enabled us to do a lot of things that we wouldn't have had the money to do otherwise. And in fact, it was with some of that money that enabled us to uniform the wages throughout the parish, and as far as I know, I think that's still the case. And got it to where truck drivers made the same parish-wide, and the same for the other positions. And as part of that was a whole big effort right there. Was unifying the parish. You had 8 contracts. Well, each road district had a union contract with them, and that was in trying to do you know the old saying, no good deed goes unpunished. Well, we made one what look back at it at a time, it probably was a mistake. But when we had the funds to do it, and it wasn't long after we were in that those funds came available, that we unilaterally brought everybody up to the highest wage that was being paid. There was no negotiation about it or anything. And well, then came along, and we should have done that. And that's one big mistake we made. If we had to do over again, would be to initiate some discussion with the union and to propose that, you know, and get some agreement about a parish-wide contract. And the problem was they already had that. They already had the wage increase when we started trying to negotiate a parish-wide contract, and that was a marathon effort there when I was on the negotiating committee for that, and we would meet in caucus and talk about how, what we were going to propose. And they came there with a laundry list of things they wanted everybody to be off on their birthday and things like that. And we just didn't get very far. And part of the problem was that at that time, Pete Menina, the late Pete Menina, who was from the old jury, and had been reelected, he was particularly friendly to the union, and we would caucus on some position, and then at some point he'd go tell them what our position, what our framework was as far as, and they had to fight that going on. But I'm telling you, we were up here till 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. That time after time, really, I can't tell you how many sessions we had. Just didn't get anywhere. And of course, and I, being a lawyer, I negotiated that same way I would of anything else. And when they would propose something, I'd make a counter proposal, and it'd go back and forth. Well, some of them got to feeling like just because I didn't jump on something, that they said I was anti-union. That we had to fight that for a while, and we were trying to do, like I say, no good deed goes unpunished. It ended up passing on an 8-7 vote. I voted against it. And the 7 of us who voted against it were against it because it didn't have a maintenance tax to go with it, and they wanted to build it, but no provision for the maintenance. And naturally, the livestock people and the Cattlemen's Association all wanted it, and there some of the same people who were people in the community who were trying to improve the administration of the jury and all that had the same position we did. And we voted, and the president didn't vote except in case of a tie. And so there we were, 7-7. Gene Whitler was president, and he had a long history with the rodeo and livestock and agriculture, and he voted for it. And it passed to build the Coliseum. I think it would have gotten built eventually, because I think if it hadn't passed, I think eventually they'd have done something about a maintenance tax, and I believe it has a maintenance tax now. Yeah. And our complaints proved right, because they went through things to give it to the state or to get the state to pick it up, and McNeese picked it up and did different things because it was too big of a financial burden on the jury. And there was a lot of controversy about it because there were a lot of people who wanted to build it. And it was a great idea. Of those, I've certainly had a lot of respect for those of us who were running for the purpose of going on a unit system, and that underlay everything we did, really, that particular effort. Charlie Liggio has always been a friend of mine, was then, before then, and still is. And Julian was so dedicated about it, probably a juror, as a juror, Julian was more the representative of the spirit of the thing, he was, and then I tell you, another guy that I came to think a lot of, and it was, he ultimately voted for the unit system, was Neg Beglis, and he tried to move with the times, and there was a lot of integrity about him and all those guys I just mentioned. If they told you they were going to do something a certain way, that's the way they would do it. It didn't have that problem of committing to something and then, you know, backing away from it. And I had well, we mentioned Rodney Vincent already, but I had a high regard for him and his integrity and his ability. And Rodney was a lot of fun to be around. You know, now I'll tell you another. Well, I considered a main thing more symbolic than anything else was getting a parish-wide library tax, and we did that. And I remember Jim Suddeth, who was then the mayor, and he supported most of us, not those of us that were trying to change things, because he'd been complaining for a long time that the police jury wasn't spending any of the road tax money within the city of Lake Charles. And so he was up here, and he was arguing and insisting that he wanted to be called the Lake Charles Calcasieu Parish Library System. And he was appealing to us, the Ward 3 jurors. You know, he wanted to get Lake Charles' name in it. And I could just see, by this time, I knew, and I did think of something kind of funny. I'll tell you in just a minute when I'm about the road taxes, about taxes. But I had found in time of how real the conflict was, and the really outright almost hostility between Ward 4 and Ward 3 populace. You know, and I've been grown up in Ward 3. I really didn't have that much awareness of it. But I thought I could see just how that was going to be over there in Vinton or Lake Charles, and have it called the Lake Charles Library. You know, so we voted, and I don't remember the vote on that, but it wasn't an open and shut. You know, there was a lot of it was controversial, and more than the name, and we find, and that's when we. And it involved, I forgot some of the detail on it, but it involved merging in or somehow with the Carnegie Library, the city library system, you know, but we got all that resolved, you know, and had a parish-wide. And that's one thing I see, because I use the library quite a bit, and it is we've got a superb library system here. I'd match it up anywhere with services they provide and the inventories that they have, and now the facilities that they have all over the parish, you know, in each locale. A.D.I. Saunier, the late A.D.I. Saunier, was mayor of Sulphur at the time, and I called him to try to discuss with him and try to show him the value of a parish-wide bonding system. And of course, it also meant, if you did that, it gave you the availability of the assessment value of Ward 4 and Ward 3 that could be used for the whole parish, you know, to benefit the poorer wards. We, those who favored the unit system, and when I say we were always looking for ways to do that, to try to equalize, not necessarily equalize, but offset some of the problems with the poorer wards, you know, with the ones that have less funds to operate on. And so I called him, and I was discussing the value of parish-wide bonding. He said, well, yeah, he called me Frad. He said, yeah, Fred, he said, I remember, he said, back, and he went back to the 1930s, when they wanted to have, when Lake Charles wanted to have its own school system. And that is true, what he did. And it was a good one, you know, but, and that that took all the, and it passed, and that took all the funding available out of the Ward 3 assessment for the school districts, and that was tough on all the outlying wards. He said, and I remember when they wanted to do it, he didn't want any part of parish-wide bonding, because now he had the money with all that industrial assessment in Ward 4, and he wanted to keep it like that, but that's when I say the attitude. But he'd been harboring that since they had the city school system.